The story took place in a remote mountain village in the past century, surrounded by green hills and clear streams, with winding paths through the fields. At night it was usually quiet except for the occasional croak of frogs or a dog's bark. The villagers lived simple lives, relying on farming and hunting, and everyone had close relationships. Life seemed peaceful and tranquil here. However, the villagers were wary of anything supernatural, and the elders often told stories about the soul-locking spirits at dusk to warn children not to roam around at night. Liùqiū was the village's brave and skilled hunter, recognized for his courage and talent despite his young age. Every morning he would carry his bow and arrows into the forest and return at dusk with his catch. The old villagers often said that there were things in the mountains that shouldn't be disturbed. Though Liùqiū wasn't fully convinced, he was careful not to ask too much, half believing the warnings. That night it was just past midnight when Liùqiū awoke from his sleep. He felt discomfort in his stomach and decided to go outside. The mountain night was particularly quiet, and the darkness was heavy, with only the sound of wind passing through the pine trees, making the shadows sway like layers of a black curtain. Liùqiū grabbed his oil lamp and lit it, the dim light appearing lonely in the darkness. He hesitated for a moment, but still carefully walked toward the courtyard gate. As he approached the gate, just as he was about to push it open, he heard a soft, intermittent crying nearby. It sounded like a child crying, carrying a chilling feeling. Liùqiū stopped, listening closely. The sound was faint and erratic, seemingly coming from Aunt Lee's house nearby. Who would let their child wander around crying at this hour? Liùqiū frowned, puzzled. He planned to ignore it, but the crying kept echoing in his ears, making him restless. Muttering to himself, he pushed open the gate and tiptoed toward Aunt Lee's house. As he approached the path near Aunt Lee's place, Liùqiū saw several small, dark shadows standing by the roadside in the dim moonlight. Their shapes were blurry, appearing like 5 small children. He rubbed his eyes and looked more closely, noticing that these figures had pale faces, thin bodies, and were standing together as if performing some sort of ritual, holding thin iron chains. The chains gently clinked with their movements, making an eerie sound in the night. Liùqiū's heart began pounding. He recalled the stories the elders told about soul-locking spirits, ghostly children sent to find those whose time had come, chaining their souls and taking them away. His hands started to tremble at the thought. He raised his oil lamp slightly, trying to see more clearly. The light illuminated the face of one of the spirits. The spirit slowly lifted its head, its hollow eyes staring straight at Liùqiū. That gaze petrified him, his entire body stiffened, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. He suddenly realized that these spirits had faces as pale as paper, expressionless, and seemed unaware of his presence. They continued their low whispers, their chains lightly rattling as if performing some ritual. Then the spirit in front slowly turned and took a step toward Liùqiū, its lifeless eyes locked on him. Liùqiū was so scared that he almost dropped his lamp. He quickly knelt down and began to bow, trembling as he spoke. "If I have offended you, please forgive me." He dared not look further, overwhelmed by fear, bowing repeatedly, praying for the spirits to spare him. His voice grew weaker, and the sound of chains gradually faded. After a while, Liùqiū finally mustered the courage to look up, only to find that the path was empty, as if everything had been a dream. But he knew very well it wasn't. Slowly he stood up, his body still shaking, and returned home. He told everything to his elderly father, who was nearly 80 years old. His father's face grew solemn. After a moment of silence, he sighed. "Liùqiū, those were soul-locking spirits. When they appear, they come to take a life. I fear someone in the village will soon pass away." The next morning, bad news spread through the village. Aunt Lee had died suddenly in her home, without any prior illness. She had been healthy, and her sudden death left the villagers shocked. Liùqiū, upon hearing the news, thought of the 5 spirits he saw the previous night, and his back went cold. A deep, indescribable fear spread through his heart. He remembered his father's words, convinced that those spirits had come to lock Aunt Lee's soul. Since then, Liùqiū never dared to go out at night again, nor did he go near the courtyard gate after dark. The villagers, hearing of his experience, also reminded their children to come home early after dusk to avoid encountering the soul-locking spirits wandering at night.